Hello everyone, in this tutorial let's start our scene management. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to group things that are supposed to be moving together, right? And before that you need to freeze transformation on everything. Because if the transformation is not set to default, like the rotation, translation, and scale is not having their default values, when you put them into group and try to rotate them or move them together, they're going to act unexpectedly because they get double transformation. That's what it is called. If you want to move objects with their group, they need to have their default values, okay? So that's here what we're going to do. When your character is in its resting pose, like neutral pose, you're going to select everything and then you're going to modify freeze transformation. Make sure you check the setting, just reset the setting and say apply, okay? It means now that when I go into each of these objects, the channel box shows me the default values for their channels, right? As you can see. And this is one of the good things about this, is that if you accidentally move something and you want to get it back to its original position, you know that you can always go in and put translation 0, rotation 0, and then it's going to be jumped back to its original neutral position when you freeze the transformation on, right? So that's one good thing about this. And the second thing was that the important thing that I already mentioned, that if you want to put your objects into groups and then move them together, you need to freeze transformation on the object parts so you don't get double transformation, okay? You want them to follow their group rotation or movement or whatever. That's why you need to set the default value for them, okay? The objects that are in the group. So let's just do that. So here you need to decide what are the parts that are supposed to be moving together. Okay, I start with, let's start with the hip. Okay, so I have this hip. I know that, okay, this hip, when this hip moves, I need this body parts that are on top of it to move with it too, right? So I'm just going to shift select everything. Let's just do another thing. I'm just going to select everything and put their pivot point at each of their centers. Okay, I'm just going to select everything, do modify, center pivot. Okay, so for all of them now, the pivot point is at the center. That's good. Okay, good for now. So I'm going to select this hip part and then these body parts that are attached to the hip, because I know that they're supposed to be moving together, right? I go to my outliner and I group them here, and we know how to group because we watched the previous tutorials, right? So if you do Control G, it's for grouping. As I hit Control G holding my mouse over the outliner, I can see that I have this new group. I can call this group hip. Let's just do hip. Let's just do this. GR as for group and then hip. Okay. So now I have this hip group, and you can move the groups like anything in the outliner. If you middle click and drag, you can just move them. Make sure when you move them, if it turns like this, you can see a rectangle. It means that it's going to group it under this object. I don't want that. Move it until you see a line. When you see a line, it means that, okay, it's going to be moving it up here, okay? When it looks like this, it's going to be grouping it under this object. You don't want that. If it happens, you can just middle click and drag it until you see a line, not a rectangle, okay? So I have this hip group now. First thing done, nice, okay. What would be the second part? So I want, I can look at here and I see I have this joint for the hip and the torso, and I'm like, okay, if this dude wants to bend forward, what would be the case? Like, do I want this joint to move with the torso, or do I want it to move with the, stay with the hip? Here I'm gonna decide Yeah, I wanted to stay with the hip. You can do otherwise too, like this joint can be grouped with the torso too, and you can always just, you know, change them back. But now I look at here and I'm like, okay, I want this to be in the hip group, so I'm just gonna middle click, drag to the hip group. I have this here. You can check each groups. If you click on them, you can see that they're highlighted in the viewport, right? So I'm gonna do the same thing for the legs. Like I'm gonna go here and be like, okay, so if the legs move, do I want to have these joints move with this part, or do I want them to move with the hip? For now, I'm just gonna vote for let's move these two parts together. Okay. You can do it otherwise. Probably it all depends to your design. Okay. And if your joints has like multiple parts, it doesn't matter, right? It is also, you know, it is supposed to be moving with something. Just decide about what are the groups that you want to move together. Like here, I can just do, okay, these two parts, I want to put them in group. So I'm gonna just hold my mouse over outliner. I'm gonna hit Control G to group them. I'm gonna rename this group to GR underscore and upper leg. Again, no spacing, and you can use camel casing for like when the word ends. Okay. Upper leg, I'm just gonna middle click, drag it up here on top of this and just release it. Okay, so I have this upper leg group, and here I'm gonna decide, okay, I want this to move with this part, so I'm just gonna do the same. Command G, group, move it up. You can move, you know, not move them up. I don't know why I do that. That's just how I do things. I like to, when I group them, I just move them up. So you can do that, or you can just leave them where they are. So GR underscore lower leg. Ooh, I should put right and left at the end of the group name. Let's just do that. So for hip, we only have one hip, so it doesn't matter. But for the group upper leg, I'm just gonna put underscore left, because that's the left leg of my model, right? Left. So for changing the name, you know, you can just double click and type in the name, right? Okay. So again, here I can decide, okay, I want this part to move with this part, right? When the body parts move, I want them to be moving like this. I'm just gonna hit Control G and rename it to GR underscore, how should I call this part? Let's see, foot would be good. Foot underscore left. So if you have any other parts on top of the, like the foot, that are supposed to be moving with this, when they move, just put them in this group, right? Just gonna move it up, upper leg, and then lower leg, and then hip. Okay. You know, you can just move up and do the same thing for the rest of them. One thing I want to notice here, I want to mention here, is that, okay, so if you haven't done the mirroring already, like you can do it after you group and rename them, right? Because in this way, you can just duplicate the group. Like if I do, okay, but first you need to rename them. Okay, so when you grouped everything, like, you know, when you grouped one part, just go in and rename the parts too. Like here, I'm gonna be like, okay, this is joint 1. And if you have like too many intricate parts, you can just group them inside this and rename them. Like, you know, if you have like more than 12 parts for just this joint, just group everything and just name the group, okay? But, you know, for me, because there are not many like body parts, I can just rename them here. But a good working habit would be to rename stuff as you create them, okay? Because going is afterward would be like a little bit hectic, okay? We don't want that. But if you're like me and you haven't named all of them, you can just go in and rename them. Okay, so I'm just going to do upper leg, hit enter here, lower leg, like joint 2, and then here lower leg. Okay, and I want to do underscore left here. And for the joints also, I'm gonna do joint 1 underscore left, and then joint 2 underscore left. Okay. And then here I'm gonna just go in and do joint 3 underscore L and foot left. Okay, so now look what you can do with this. So if you haven't done the mirroring, or you have done it, or you're like me, you want to do it twice and you're lazy, you don't want to rename everything, you can have this part selected and the freeze transformation on all of them, and selecting these groups, you can do duplicate a special. I'm just gonna put all these body parts in a display layer here and just hide it so we can try this. So I'm just gonna select all the groups that are containing the body parts with the names. I'm gonna do, as you can see, the pivot point for all the groups by default it is at the center of the project. So I don't need to modify the pivot point. Okay. So I'm just gonna go to edit, duplicate a special. And you can see the nice thing about it is that, you know, I have all the groups, I have all the body parts names. I just need to go in and change the lefts to the right, right? To the right, right? Okay, so middle click, push everything up, put it here. So now I can do, instead of L1, just gonna do R. And because they were in a group, the name that didn't add like a number at the end, right? Maya doesn't consider it to be two objects at the same place, so it lets you have the same name, but you don't want to have that. Okay, so go in and change all the lefts to the right. Okay, I forgot to put left and right for this. I'm gonna just do this here, upper leg, underscore left, right. This is again, this needs to be right, this needs to be right. Okay, so you see how it goes. This is like a good way of saving time. So a good way of doing things would be like to rename them as you create them, because when you duplicate them you get the name just with the number at the end, and then you can always go in and change the left to the right and things like that. Okay, and here I'm just gonna do the same for all the parts, right and right, and here I have everything renamed, I think, right? Yes. Okay, so I have these groups for leg on the left side, and then I have these groups on this side for the right foot. Okay, but remember, because we use duplicate a special, now if I click on these groups, you can see that the scale X is -1 because I use duplicate a special to mirror them, right? So I'm just gonna select all these groups and do modify freeze transformation, okay? Because we want the transformation on every group and every body part to be the default setting, okay? Because I mirrored the groups and not the objects, they're stayed intact. You know, the channels are showing the default setting for them because I used their group to duplicate them. Right? I clicked on the group and duplicated the groups, and because the objects inside them have already had like the default values, they stayed the same. Okay, so So I can do the same for all the body parts. Just go in and decide about the parts that needs to stay together when they move, and rename and group them. And we're gonna continue this in the next tutorial.